Welcome to RiderChoices RiderCoach Life. RiderCoach Life is a dialogue with rider coaches for enhancing communications while helping to develop and improve our culture. We share experience and knowledge in our efforts to reduce crash injuries and fatalities in motorcyclists. So, how was everybody's week?
I didn't die.
Very good. Hey, Don, today I was watching a old Mission King of the Baggers race, and
Yep.
I saw some training going on, and I caught the logo Ride With Us. Is that a subsidiary of MSF or some kind of marketing arm or something?
Yes.
Okay.
But not necessarily just MSF. It's an initiative that was started under MIC, but it has been coordinated more and more. The MSF rider coaches kind of support it.
Okay. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Mr. Weiss, how are you? Mr. Weiss, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, I couldn't get the mute to unmute.
Copy that. Long time no see.
Yeah. We have winter approaching. Lows are supposed to hit the low 30s next week.
I think we're looking at some snow accumulation up here ourselves.
Yeah.
Although I don't think we can catch up with Paul in North Dakota.
No. Well, at least hopefully not here.
Hey, we don't have much. Probably a quarter-inch on the ground right now.
Yeah, we're the same. We have some leftover piles, but nothing.
Yeah, that's about it. I was riding last month, plan to ride this month.
Please keep it where you're.
I missed that last word.
I said, please keep it where you are at.
Yeah. It's a good word.
We call that a 4-letter word here, and we want none of it. None at all. Mark, I got some questions for you, man. I've had a rough day
Oh,
talking about historical documents and where things came from. And then I thought, when I saw your face tonight, I said, man, I should have texted Mark when I was in the middle of the conversation. Not that you can help, but you certainly would have a perspective.
that's possible.
We were talking about the 20 feet on the range. And I know that we all talk about it being 20 feet runoff, but it's actually 20 feet for obstacle avoidance, is it not?
The first 20 feet, 40 feet is what used to be recommended. The first 20 feet needed to be paved and obstacle free. And then whatever was beyond 20 feet up to 40 feet needed to be taken into consideration. For instance, in Norfolk, the two ranges were near the helicopter servicing facility, so they were right on water. So one of the ranges, the one that was closest to the water, actually needed to have life rings, because it would be difficult but not impossible to make it to the water.
That's almost funny. So when we were discussing that, then we started talking the topics of the distance. What's the smallest range you could have? Where did the 56 and the 114 come from? Two wheel, three wheel.
56 came from 6-foot motorcycle and 50 feet of spacing.
And that was based on a braking distance.
Based on reasonable distance, giving projected range speeds, giving enough space for avoidance without having to resort to high level skill.
So how did that go to 114 with three wheel? Any idea?
114?
Yep, that's what's in the three wheel guide.
Oh, I know nothing about the 3-wheel curriculum.
And the one
I
guy
shouldn't
that
say-
did is no longer here.
I shouldn't say nothing. I know little about the 3-wheel curriculum. It could have to do with the potential speed of bikes being used in a new riding class, new riders course.
I was a certified trike instructor with the Goldwing Road Riders Association. Their ARC is identical to MSF's ARC. Their trike course is very, very similar to MSF's. And I can tell you the turning radius on some of those stink, especially if they have that easy steer or whatever a particular trike kit manufacturer wants to call it, where they draw the rake out more to make it easier to turn, easier to go straight. You know, with the push-pull steering, they're a bear cat to turn. I mean, they're just tough to turn. And one of the exercises is actually zigzagging from one end of the range to the other. It's sort of like an offset cone weave, except they're offset by 70 feet or something. So I don't have the measurements memorized or anything, but it just takes the whole range. It takes a wide chunk of real estate, and it's no fun. And I finally let it lapse because I just hate riding a trike that much.
Aw.
I know.
When a brand new rider, I range aided in several trike classes, and when a brand new rider accidentally overdoes the throttle, just a bit, especially if they're on one of the clutchless models, they go a very long distance in a very, very, very short period of time. Your perspective as a coach, as staff out on the range, your perspective has to change considerably. Not just standing clear of the
Rear wheel.
widely spaced wheels, but of being out of striking range if the vehicle lunges forward.
Yeah, so we use grams of pressure for turning, initiating lean and turning a motorcycle, and they use literally pounds of pressure, and it doesn't recover by itself. I mean, if you have a side wind and you're gonna go from Fargo to Medora, North Dakota, you are going to be pushing on one handlebar and pulling on the other all day long. And the next day you're going to hurt so bad, you're going to wonder who punched you in the chest. It's just not a motorcycle. So when somebody comes to me and my significant other, thinks I'm like a drunken sailor when I come to a stop, so I'm just going to get a trike, I'll say, give me 45 minutes in the parking lot. We'll fix that. And less than half take you up on that. And more than half are willing to lay a blowtorch to a perfectly good motorcycle and destroy it. And then find out that they don't like trikes either. But you can't convince them of that when it's the remedy, keep mama happy, everybody's happy. There must be something to that. And the happy must be much more valuable than I ever imagined, because these guys are willing to do crazy things. So, but yeah, my thought is always, let's learn to fix the problem rather than put a big ugly Band-Aid on it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Heinz is in the room.
Well, thank you, Mr. Green.
Well, I haven't seen you in so very long. I was beginning to wonder if you were still alive.
Well, of course I'm still alive. Alive and well as a snowbird in Florida.
No way.
Way.
Oh, lucky guy. So all these questions that we are talking about, the trikes and the range setup, come from the Motorcycle Safety Program Committee in the SMSA, as we're trying to come up with a set of standards that slightly supersede the NHTSA standards that are currently under revision, just so that we can have agreement. And so, whenever you talk about standards, it's good to know, why things were designed the way they were. And what I've found out, and that's why I come to you, Mark, what I found out is there's no documentation on a lot of this stuff. A lot of this was created, researched, verified, field tested, but not documented.
Somewhere there is, I think it was a soft cover publication. It was the range layout guide or something very close to that. And I used to have one, but it was from I don't remember if it was from the MRC RSS or MRC, but it went into more detail on why some of them things needed to be the way they were, especially when it dealt with placement of curves on custom ranges. So where you were placing a curve and then the distance there needed to be to the runoff to the outside is greater than the 20-foot runoff that's paved runoff that's standard. So the curves had to be placed inboard, and there was more detail on some of the rationales in that guide.
And now I'm in search of another elusive document.
And I'll check. I may, if I have my first chief guide, I may have it.
Well,
But I'd have to look there.
that would be like a golden egg at this point.
I'm writing a note.
It's crazy, just crazy. So I guess we're supposed to talk about structured flexibility tonight. Any thoughts to open this up with?
Structured flexibility greatly reduces frustration because your target is so much bigger.
But then
Explain.
according to the videos, depending on whether you like structure, it increases your stress. Because people that like stress, I watched the 3 videos that were attached to the email.
What?
The one lady was talking about the fact that if your preference is towards structure, having the situations come up where you have to adapt and change and be flexible causes more stress, whereas people that like change or like the structure flexibility work better in that environment. And that's one of the, it seems like there was 2 different camps from what I took in. I don't know if anybody else watched the videos and can comment.
Yeah, if you want everything to be very orderly and to happen in a particular way, especially in the context they were talking about in the videos, dealing with youth, and especially youth of widely varying abilities and challenges, you're going to be tremendously disappointed because you may have expectations that cannot be met. And someone's going to end up being unhappy.
Right, that's the point she was trying to get across. But we spend a lot of time in our preparation to make sure things, go off without a hitch or reduce the possibilities of issues. It seems on two different sides of the scale. Our prep, we're taught to be prepared. We have a whole list of checklists of things that we need to do to make sure things come off smoothly. But on the other hand, we need to be ready for those. And I think the one point that I got from it was making sure that if you have in her reference was, if you have an alternate activity, make sure it is pre-planned to make sure it meets the goal, not just something to keep people busy because you have nothing else to do. It should be pertained and tied into that. So again, it goes back to the proper planning to make sure that you can pull out something that says, hey, if this goes awry, switch to plan B, but that plan B still has to tie into the goal, not just be a time killer.
Well, and sometimes you don't even have to switch to plan B. You just have to see if you have to determine if what's occurring is actually going to meet the goal, maybe not on the originally thought of path, but maybe it's going to get there anyway. That's where is section 5 of the RiderCoach guide is so critically important, in that making sure that your planning and your structure always takes into account the fact that you're teaching a very diverse group of learners, and being prepared for 12 different ways of doing the exact same thing.
Yeah. It was good. I think there are 3 good videos, Don. Thanks for posting them.
It's hard to find good videos. There's so many out there. But one of the things that you talked about, kind of the two varying perspectives of structure and flexibility, really got me to thinking about things. And so in that, this is the theory I came up with. And so when you look at this, how does this relate to structured flexibility? Or does it at all?
Hey, Tom, you on that call?
No thoughts?
Different, I mean, as we know, there are different types of people, different types of learners, different ways of thinking. And you're not going to one way of communicating, one way of getting ideas across, one way of even providing an experience that they learn from isn't going to help all of them equally.
I would say the words that come to mind with those 3 is concept, design, and build. Off the top of my head.
So I like the concept, design, and build attributes. How does that relate to a BRC?
Well, I think about it somewhat in terms of a question that was posed the other day on, I don't recall if it was the MSF RiderCoach page or the RCL page, but it had to do with when the fog rolls in halfway through your day, what do you do instead? And I think that that's maybe, I think the answer was, okay, well, you pull out, how to construct a crash scenario. We have tools in our toolkit that we can pull out at will, with the caveat being, I'm not sure just how much of that is being taught in current RCPs, given the focus on EP 111. I mean, I took my RCP 5 years ago, and we were still teaching and executing and conducting the construct a crash. We were still conducting many of the other exercises, some of which have moved their way out of the BRC. But I think it was very refreshing for me to see, okay, this is something that I have in my toolkit that I can pull out if it's a rainy afternoon and I can't finish all my exercises. I shouldn't just send everybody home. So there's something that we can do that can instill other layers of learning beyond just wheels are turning kind of thing.
So to be kind of clear about that, with the current RiderCoach preps, there has not been a change in how they should be done, i.e. we should still be within the RiderCoach prep learning how to do the E3 by 5 by 10, the EP11 version, and the 5 by 5 by 10. So I would hope that all the RiderCoach preps that have been going on at least do the first two, and then I expect the EP 1 by 11, if you haven't been involved with one of those preps yet, that all of those will be represented in any future preps. Because anywhere in the United States, you could be doing any one of those three.
Sure.
Curriculum.
That's great. Great to hear that that's still being covered by all of the RCP programs. I think it was for me. Sorry?
Should be.
Should be, yes. I think for me, it was more refreshing and eye-opening of, yeah, I do have these tools in the kit. I don't just have a hammer and a couple of screwdrivers. There's other things that I can use when the class needs to either take an extended break for one reason or another, or the weather doesn't cooperate for the day, and it's not just an all is lost kind of situation. So I think that sort of ties back into the structured flexibility. We know we have 14 exercises and 5 eval steps to get through, as well as a certain amount of content, and thinking and strategies, but there are other things that we can cover.
I was going to say that, I think of structured flexibility more as range stuff, but I think it's good that you bring up some of the classroom stuff, because I think that as sites transition to the EP1, they kind of, put the classroom stuff behind them and,
Right.
and don't remember that it's there as a resource. And, as an example, I was teaching with a guy over the summer, and he had overheard some of the younger guys in the class talking about how they were, they planned to go out stunting and, horsing around on their motorcycles. And so he talked to me on a break. He says, gee, I overheard them having this conversation. I says, I'd like to address that, but I'm not really sure of a great way to do it. And I said, well, how about at the end of the class when we're doing the wrap up, you work in the activity sheet with the choices. I said, and you don't need to just do that one, do a few of them so it's not obvious, but you can kind of have that conversation about stunting in public. And they don't know that that's not part of the wrap up, but why couldn't it be, So he did that. And I don't know if he made, an impact, but he felt better for having done it. So.
Sure.
And one of the things I've been afraid of in the past couple of years, since the virus kind of changed how we do things, is that people try to be more efficient. Well, I can only do this, so I'm only going to do this. And in that, we lose the depth and breadth of the knowledge that we used to have. And we find ways not to be curious or expand and go beyond the minimum anymore. And that's always kind of been one of the worries I've had, considering that I feel like I'm part of a profession where we have to make those kind of things happen, always improve. Any other thoughts?
Doesn't it come down to the mastering of the information? Lynn made a comment last week that really set a light bulb off for me as we were talking about exercise 3, and she wove a very nice discussion about, okay, exercise 3, they're accelerating, they're decelerating. She tied it back to engine braking. She tied it into the knowledge test, where having all that information, very, a great handle on that information from the years of experience, but she was able to take that one thing and take a range exercise, move it to the e-course, move it to the knowledge test, all that type of thing. I guess that's what I strive for, is trying to understand if something goes wrong in a particular exercise, knowing exactly what's the objective of that exercise and what's the objective of the next exercise, so I can move forward smoothly without a trip type of thing. But, having that information, I wouldn't say committed to memory, because the range guide is in my hand, but it's certainly a lot easier to react on your feet when you're not flipping through the range guide trying to figure out what's going on next. So that's, when I look at it, that's how I interpret it, is that I have the information to use all the tools in my toolbox, know what tools are in the box, and when to bring them out for what purpose.
Well, one of the challenges in my state is we still administer the level 2 test. So that idea of weaving in the concepts and if you can weave it in as dialogue, why not do that, as opposed to ending the class and coming back to classroom and saying, okay, now we're going to do a review, and now you got to jog up all this memory out of the e-course, where you could have injected it into your, whether it's a reflection or just a break time discussion. So I took my cards, I did a prep last spring, and on purpose highlighted every test question in the range cards, so that I had that, at least had that handy to offer that during the class.
I love the toolbox analogy, because a new mechanic who's just starting out can't afford and hasn't invested in their career enough to have every tool and to know all the ways they could use every tool. They have kind of the basics, and then as they hone their profession, they add more tools to their toolbox, and they discover new ways to use the existing tools. And that's one of the benefits of being here, is we get to learn from each other. What are some other tools? What are some different ways we can use the basic tools that we have? And that's the flexibility piece, is you can't have that flexibility unless you have some understanding and are willing to invest to add tools to your toolbox and figure out how to effectively use those tools.
Are you suggesting we're a bunch of tools here, Rita?
Well, some of us are. I don't know about you.
No, I do think that that's a valid analogy, and personally for me, it's one of the reasons that I show up as frequent or infrequent as I do here. It's, I don't know if it's my own sense of where I was coaching and even where I'm coaching now. I recently relocated last fall from one state to another, and seeing a significant difference in the way things are presented. But I think just coming on here or sitting in and reading some of the stuff that is posted on the Facebook sites helps me add bits and pieces and certain tools that aren't yet in my toolbox, and helps me develop that. So, I think this stuff is hugely beneficial.
So when I started considering structured flexibility as a topic earlier this week, it was, as always, generated by questions that people had and answers that people gave. And although, I went immediately to the RiderCoach guide to, read what the RiderCoach guide says, I also went back to a book that I found a long time ago. I'll share it here. Let me see if I can get it right. It's called Human Performance, and it's by Fitz and Posner. And if you've ever been in one of the IRETS sessions with Ray, it's probably one that has come up in the past. And I just quickly, was flicking through it to find some of the things that I highlighted. And one of the first things that came up, and I thought it was really good, was the concept of hierarchical and sequential organization is basic to an understanding of the processes involved in skill, learning, and performance. And then later on, it says these fixed sequences, which is what I consider structure to be, are under the control of a higher level or executive program, which provides the overall logical or decision framework that gives the system its flexible and adaptive characteristics. So with that structure, within that structure is where our flexibility is, not outside of it. And I thought that was, it just kind of jumped out at me. So why do we need the structure, I guess, is the question that I pose to everybody.
Before I jump into answering your question, your recent question, Don, I like the fact that everyone here has been talking about flexibility in terms of just bringing context and knowledge, and not focusing on time. Because in the past, I've seen so many people talk about structure and flexibility of the curriculum in terms of time management, which kind of like is the opposite of what we're talking about here. I like that. Why do we have the structure? So that we have a blueprint. That's what I feel. We need to know how to get from A to B. New riders understanding how to be on the bike, control the bike, ride the bike, and do what is needed to be on the road. Kind of like driver's ed. There's a structure of how students learn how to drive a car before they're actually given permission to be on the road with other car drivers.
Well, going back to your little diagram before, your engineer is the nuts and bolts guy, making sure it's all going to work, but you have the architect that comes up with the vision for it. Are we going to have a doorway that's shaped like this or shaped like that? They got to know some of that engineering stuff to be able to make those decisions. Otherwise, they might make something that would fail. So, we need to have that background in order to make the choices going forward,
So
I think that having an outline helps to make sure that we don't have to redefine over and over and over again what is a door, for example. Right?
only you, Robin. So let me talk about this just a little bit more, because I think we have some rider coaches out there that are extremely phenomenal at finding ways to articulate concepts to our students that have very little to do with structure. They have a way of connecting with students in an artistic way, so to speak, but it doesn't always follow the structure. And then we also have these engineers that are well versed in the curriculum and what the rider coach guide says and what the range card says and some of the motor development theories that are behind it. And so they stick to that script really well. And I think it takes an architect that is a little artist and a little engineer to kind of put that stuff together and really give the student what they deserve. And I'd like to quickly go to the chat box where Joe West says, can you communicate what the classroom activities are supposed to be getting across? What do you do during EP1 activities to tie them into the curriculum? I think this is where the architect really comes into play, because the architect knows the curriculum because they're part engineer. They understand what the intent of the curriculum is. And the artist finds ways to take those key moments to give the appropriate feedback and connect what the curriculum has for the student that may not necessarily be readily visible or on the card. And that's where we can combine those two attributes to better help the student. Is that understandable, or did I talk too much?
The best coaches are going to be able to correlate what's in the classroom to what's going on in the range, to real life out on the highway, and how it all fits together.
I agree. Rick got a great machinist thing down here, because I can't tell you how many engineers have provided a blueprint that has flaws in it that the machinist has to figure out a way around them, or go back to the engineer and say, well, here's our problem, how would you like me to fix it? It's
I
true.
was going to say that the architect, I mean, they are both the creativity and the rigid side, the math side. I mean, it all makes sense, but you could still have a really bad architect,
You could.
like
You could.
you start throwing like self-appointed opinions into the mix, and you're going to get some walls that don't match dimensionally speaking.
Well,
But yeah, it's like,
after a house is built, there are no square corners, right?
right. So like, okay, here you are, an architect, and you're viewing something that is an organic thing you have to deal with. The student, their learning style, their concerns, their worries, their confidence, whatever it is. You have the engineering side, which maybe that's, in this case, in my analogy, is the curriculum itself, and you have to find some way to steer that to the recipient. That in and of itself is going to require you to be both creative and able to engineer the wording that matches the recipient.
Absolutely. And when we go to a rider coach prep, when we begin to be a rider coach, we are given a national certification so that we can go anywhere in the United States. And once we're accepted, I know sometimes that's difficult, but once you're accepted where you at, you have to learn to communicate to the students, and you have all these colloquialisms or cultural things that you have to deal with. That's where you kind of have to be an architect. You got to morph and change your colors to help orchestrate what the student needs at that point.
Come on.
More thoughts about structured flexibility?
Don, you talked about, the geography of changing, but when I was listening to the videos this afternoon, I was thinking more about the point that was trying to be made is that in the classroom, I've got 6, 8, or 12 students, and I've got a different approach that I need to adapt to each one of them to make sure they get the maximum. And some of them may be more on the creative side, some of them may be more on the structured side, whatever it might be. And as a coach, you're requested or required to adapt to each individual student. One message is not, one size does not fit all. And that's what I was getting out of it, as opposed to, a geographic difference.
Well, there's that too.
Right. Okay.
So what does the Rider Coach guide say about structured flexibility? Because there are some key bullet points, I think, that a lot of people don't think about in there.
You need to be true to the sequence. You can't get ahead of yourself. I mean, I'm sure QA people have seen some pretty, too flexible stuff lacking the structure, where coaches they kind of go off on a tangent or ask students to do stuff that they haven't gotten to yet, is a problem. Those motor skills principles have to be followed.
So
yeah, on a simpleton flip side, the rider coach positions are up to the rider coach. As long as there's range control, that is a flexible option per the cards. But
so
Lynn's comment was way more interesting. Let's go with that.
Lynn said the bullet point that Lynn aligns with is, does it align with the sequence and flow? And when it talks about sequence and flow, is it progressive, and does it underburden or overburden the student with the information that you're giving? And so, quite often people have a tendency to overburden. And then I've seen, sites where people are bored because you're not challenging them enough. Joe West has the first 3 bullets in a 3-letter acronym. What are they? It's in the chat.
Safe,
Effective.
come on.
Execute.
Safe, effective, efficient.
Safe,
Okay.
effective,
There you
and efficient.
go.
And so what does the Rider Coach say about each one of those? Because, people quite often will get safe, effective, efficient, and they usually jump to the efficient part. And on the efficient part, it says efficient, but not for the coach. Efficient for the learning of the student. That's the efficiency we're looking for. What are the other 2?
Is it safe? That's our first priority.
And so what does that mean? Safety. I know I'm asking really fundamental questions, but the Rider Coach guide really highlights them well.
Well, the Rider Coach talks about any action that we do for it to be effective, we have to be aware that, are we achieving the objective with safety in mind?
Okay, but what kind of safety are we talking here?
The student's safety and the overall range environment, learning environment for them.
Is there anything else we have to be concerned with besides range environment?
Rider Coach
Could be
the student.
Could be psychological safety also.
Okay, psychological, emotional. That's what Axe put up there. So yeah, I mean, it's the whole environment. It's not just the physical hurt. It's, are we embracing them and bringing them into the fold so that they can learn and they feel comfortable learning?
you know, what the operational safety, you know, are the students doing things, their performance, is it, you know, are we influencing their performance with the choices we make in our changes to the structure?
Yeah.
Are we creating situations where crash risk is increased instead of decreased?
Yeah, and that's not on the student, is it? Not at all. They're the outcomes of our poor decision making.
So somewhere in the Rider Coach Guide, it talks about having safety top of mind and thinking about safety in all the different possible ways, you know, that you can think about it. And you know, so not every coach always has that in mind. You know, there's stuff that they sometimes don't see the woods for the trees, maybe in their effort, like you said, to be more efficient, that they make choices that maybe aren't the safest.
I like Joe asked another good question. Is it safe to challenge your students sometimes?
Necessary sometimes.
Last week we talked about stress, didn't we? No, that was another question. No, somebody asked on RCL. What defines good stress?
I think the key here is keeping a positive learning environment.
Maybe good stress is they're unsure, but they're willing to give it a go. You know, they're not impeded by their stress.
I agree with Ron. We need to challenge them in healthy ways, but of course, the reason we're there as coaches is to monitor and determine if and when they become a danger to themselves or to others. Others would include rider coaches and anybody on the perimeter of the range. I mean, even people on the adjacent roadway. But that's why we're there as coaches, and we need to be able to quickly identify when they become a danger to themselves or others.
But I think the only way to do that is to read each student and read them as individuals, not necessarily as a class, and make a determination is, you know, is Bill capable of getting a little bit quicker in his completion of the exercise 6 circuit? Or is Bill getting a little ahead of himself and maybe leaning at an angle where you start to become concerned about his ability to stay on path or avoid dragging hard parts on the bike? And sort of finding out that sweet spot between giving him enough rope and reeling him back in.
Can anybody give an example in the cards where do the cards ever automate our ability to safely and productively challenge the students?
I think every exercise is a challenge in itself, as far as introducing a new skill.
Are you ready to move on to the next exercise?
I'm a little fascinated by this can also depend on how we as coaches are feeling during any given moment of any given day. There's like right now, a little hungry, long day. I'm thinking about how I want to challenge them by forcing them to do it by them, make them draw it out of them, do all the stuff we do to try and be lazy and shutting up and getting them to do the work themselves. How can I convince them to challenge themselves and be more of a bystander and a coach than somebody who is standing in front of them making a point or whatever? But that's just where I happen to be right at this moment.
Well, you know, in exercise 4, the perimeter turns aren't the thrust of the exercise, but we say, hey, go ahead and see if you can make that turn. In fact, my coaching on that exercise is usually, hey, go ahead and have a crack at the turn, see how you do, and I kind of try to keep it on the down low, to make it not threatening. And most of them do really well. It's actually, if you compare it to previous incarnations of the curriculum where those corners were a problem area because of how they were taught, students usually rise to the occasion, I think.
Lynn, you beat me to the punch. I was just about to talk about exercise 4 because last week there was a question about shifting and perimeter turns, like when do we focus on this and focus on that? So going back to challenging a student, yes, the exercise is about shifting. It's not about the perimeter turn, but there's an opportunity to challenge a student to do something or encourage them to make the perimeter turn or do something else. That's a good challenge, low stress, and it's safe, because if you feel that a student has achieved the shifting, then here's a safe place where you can encourage them to do part B, of the sub objective of, like, here's a perimeter turn, let's focus on doing this correctly now, so that later on, exercise 7, exercise 9, full range, and 14, you don't have to talk about perimeter turns so much. It's already established there. So going back to safe, when's it safe to do something? Well, as long as you're not endangering them, implanting false information, and if they have met the objective, the main objective of the exercise, it's safe to do a little bit more, encourage them or challenge them to do more. I believe in exercise 12, curve judgment, 11 and 12, adjust your speed for the curve. The car just says accelerate to a certain speed and set yourself up for the curve. Well, it doesn't necessarily say how to set it up. We're encouraging the student to find their own line, own curve, own speed. That's the way we can challenge them now, because they've gone to day 2. They know how to slow press roll. Now we're going to change that to smooth.
So all this talk about challenging a student, I've been really hard looking for this graphic because it reminds me of something from my past of, where do we want to get the student? And I thought this is a pretty good graphical depiction of that. So do we want to put them in a place where they're uncomfortable?
Looks like it's a necessity.
It kind of is, isn't it?
Absolutely. A very wise man once said to me that all growth comes outside the comfort zone. If we don't put the students in at least some level of an uncomfortable zone, how are they going to grow to match the skills that we want? We ask for skills that they currently don't have, and then we give them the tools to learn those skills.
If you look at this chart, a lot of the early exercise counsel outs, students are in that fear zone.
So how do we get them through that fear zone into a learning zone?
I had an interesting comment from a student last week that had taken a BRC a couple years earlier, maybe it was a year and a half, at my location here at Corey Station in Pensacola. And the student said to me, he says, and this was at the end of the class, he says, I really appreciate the fact that you were not stressful at all during the class. You were always calm and you were very articulate and you helped us see through what it was that we needed to do. He says, the last time I took the course, it was like the rider coach was like constantly mad and upset and, wanting us to push. And, my philosophy is let's let them learn and grow at their speed. still staying within certain time constraints so that we can get through the curriculum, in the 2 days that we're doing it. But I thought that was very interesting that he pointed out the fact that I was reasonably calm the whole time, even though I asked them to do things that were a little out of their comfort level. They were comfortable with the way they were feeling, and they were encouraged and looking to grow. So I thought that was interesting.
No,
So
I think that's really important. And I think the students having some confidence in us is important. I think part of that comes from our attitude, how we approach it. Because if we're all uptight and flustered, as some coaches get flustered, the students don't get it right, and they get sometimes they get angry at the student, which makes no sense at all. But they get frustrated, and sometimes that comes out, and that just gets in the way.
I don't know if it's in the RiderCoach guide or not. I didn't remember that we were supposed to read that thing ever. But one thing that stuck with me from my RiderCoach prep was the phrase high challenge, low threat. We put students in a challenging environment. We're asking for skills that they don't have yet, and then we're giving them the tools to learn those skills. But we're not. It goes back to what Lynn's saying. We're not yelling at them. We're saying, hey, I have students come up to me in exercise 4. Oh, I forgot the downshift. I'm so sorry. And I said, and I look at them, did you die? And they go, no. I said, well, then we're fine. We'll try it next time. We'll get it. No big deal.
They kind of have to have permission to make mistakes. I tell them, I kind of talk a little bit about how, we're setting up an environment for them to trying to try out learning to ride a motorcycle, and that a lot of their progress is going to come from them. And I kind of equate it to bowling. I say, hey, the first time you went bowling, you rolled a gutter ball, didn't you? And everybody nods their head. I said, so you said, hey, next time I'm not going to roll it that way. I'm going to try to roll it a different way. And you're going to be doing some experimentation like that as you learn to operate the controls. And you're going to make some mistakes. I'm here to try to keep your mistakes to be, not serious ones. But don't freak out, if you're making some boo-boos along the way, they'll resolve if you let them.
my general comment to students when they say that they made a mistake in that, I'll state, no, wait a minute, let me ask you a question. When you came out of your mother's womb, you immediately were able to run a 5K, right? Well, no. You were probably able to at least walk. No. You probably weren't even able to crawl yet. And that's what we're doing. We're taking, certain steps, baby steps. We learn how to crawl, and we learn how to stand, and we learn how to walk, then we learn how to run. And it kind of equates to them that, yeah, you're right. I wasn't perfect right out the gate. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Ben.
No worries. You pretty much covered where I was headed. I have students come up and they say, oh, I don't know how to do this. And I say, well, you've been riding motorcycles for 20 years, right? Well, no, you've never ridden a motorcycle before, right? Yeah. Well, then how can I expect you to do it perfectly right now? You're going to be fine. As long as you don't crash and die, we're doing fine. No worries.
I'm hearing the die thing a little bit too much. It's making me nervous.
I haven't killed any of them yet.
What makes me nervous is somebody made the assumption that all babies come from women. Can you even say that nowadays?
Hey, let's.
We're not going to go there. On to the next topic.
Next.
No, by the way, Matt, you quoted directly out of the RiderCoach guide when you said high challenge, low threat, as I know you know. But this always takes me back to, we need to challenge students and support them when we challenge them. And then that provides the appropriate environment for them to move forward. And so challenge and support, high challenge, low threat, is important to learning. There's I'm trying to think about a couple different books. There's one called Behave by Robert Sapolsky, and the other one, for the life of me, I can't remember what it is. but it talks about, um, there's a lot of people that are geniuses out there, or savants. They learn to play music at an early age, and they can do a great job of playing somebody else's music, note for note, by ear. Um, and they get lots of um, support, and everybody thinks, oh, you're going to be great, you're going to be great, but at a certain point in their career or lifespan of doing what they're doing, they plateau out. And the reason why they plateau out is they can only do other people's stuff. They don't have the creativity to take it to the next level and do their own stuff. And that's because they really haven't been challenged. Their challenge has been to recreate something that somebody else did. But when it comes to creating something for themselves and taking it to the next higher level, they fall short. And so they're not talked about after that point. And it's highlighted that if you don't challenge a student, if they don't fail, if they don't make mistakes, then they're not learning anything new.
Circling back to the structured flexibility, someone had mentioned earlier about how do you use the structured flexibility to create an environment that Matt mentioned, the high challenge, low threat for each student.
That's what's been running in my head. Every student has a different level of challenge that they can accept.
And that can be as simple as, to loop back to the exercise 4 discussion. If a student's got the shifting breaking down, challenge them more in the perimeter turns. Boom, there's a higher challenge for them. Well, you can work with other students that are still challenged by shifting and stopping.
I think Joe said it in the chat also. We'll pick on exercise 4 some more. Can you do it slower? Can you stay in the friction zone? Can you find the corners? There's all sorts of little tweaks that we can add once they've mastered, if others haven't mastered, that will challenge them. How slow can you go through the clutch controls lane? Sorry, that's where my thought ended. Tap, tap, tap. Is the thing on?
It is. We heard you. I was still laughing at how abruptly your thought ended.
I was on a roll there, and then I remembered I was monologuing.
It's all good. So, how do we know, based on structured flexibility, what judgment and decisions to make that keep us within that structure when we get flexible?
Well, it's up to us to keep tethered to the end goal, right? The objectives. Is that a direction you might?
I like the word tethered.
Yeah, I mean, if you're hanging on to what you're supposed to be, or you're trying to get out of the exercise, or a lot for every student to get out of the exercise, then whatever you are going to flex in any given direction, you better remember why and see the full arc of it, so that it will either, and even if it doesn't land, that's okay too. Like, who was it that brought up the whole how to say 15 things 15 different ways 15 times? I mean, yeah, seeing a landing point that delivers it back into the mainstream. It's so easy to say these things in here, so impossibly difficult to do it when you're actually coaching.
But is it?
You have to know what the end
Yes,
goal
Don,
is.
it is.
What's the objective? Where are you going to get there? Where does this exercise fit within the big picture, so that you don't upset the natural order?
Yeah, think of analogies. Stopping in a turn. You know, think of analogies. How far, at what point does any given rider coach say, no, it's not written that way. You can't say that. It's not in the cards. I'll use just an example, I'll use the stop sign analogy, not right out the gates, but it might be something that works for one student that, so, if you cross the line at the stop sign, that's a ticket. You've seen a corner where it says stop ahead. This is a stop sign. Did it work? I mean, was it short to say? Did it get them going? Could I get them to say it? I don't know.
So this is Belinda, by the way. I don't have my camera on because I'm cooking. But when you said that question, Don, the first thing that popped in my head is how much do you have to change if you go, hey, someone calls you the night before and goes, hey, you're going to be QA'd tomorrow. How nervous do you get? That might give you a good gauge of how flexible you have become on, things. And so how
Or
nervous
not.
do you get? Exactly.
Yeah, no,
or not. How nervous,
I used to get nervous, or actually, I've never been QA'd. I've never been QA'd. Well, yeah,
Maybe
I have.
that's part of the problem.
Oh, good one, Don. Anyhow, what I was saying was that I did get QA'd by Kelly Howard in Texas.
Same.
So
you just bribed him. I know.
Robin, how
Maybe.
many times have I stood over your shoulder and mocked you?
Oh, that's pretty good. Yes.
Wait, did you do that while you were on the range or just normal life?
Just coaching together on the range. But my point is, I don't get nervous about it because I care, but not that much that I'm gonna all of a sudden change who I am. If there are some blatant, obvious flaws that need to be dealt with, then that's something I'm gonna welcome. Because probably it won't, if I'm doing things naturally, it's not going to be so big that whatever changes are suggested don't come with a new, hey, here's a new wrench. Add that to the kit. That's all it ends up really being. That maybe something could have gone better. Here's the right socket. Maybe I'm thinking in imperial measurement and I needed to be thinking metric. It just means I'm going to get something out of it. Or maybe I'm going to do things right for 1 in 3 instances and get a minute compliment out of it. Whatever. Feed the ego.
Not sure if it got to the answer of my question, though. But I know this is not abnormal for you.
Let's revisit the question.
I think
with zero guilt.
Zero guilt. How do we know how flexible we can be within the structure then? I mean, we've got, challenge and comfort, and we know we need to follow the rules. We have all these little tricks and things that we have tried that have worked and some have not. But what gives us the bearing or the comfort for us as rider coaches to know I can do this? I'm not stepping outside the bounds when I'm being this flexible for this particular student.
I guess part of it's knowing what has happened before, what has led up to this, what have riders been exposed to, what skills do they already have, so we don't get ahead of the game.
Can I justify it in front of a jury?
I like Tiffany's
That's
like almost
true.
there.
I taught with, I had a coach, he lived from Delaware, but he came up to New York. He lasted one snowy winter before he went back to Delaware. But he was an attorney, and we were having a conversation after he went back home, and he was managing a site, and he came upon his range, and the coaches were doing there was a student that was really behind the curve and probably shouldn't have been there. And he said to them, I'm not going to tell you, how to run your class. He says, but, if Mary goes on to the next exercise and crashes and burns, are you going to be able to justify in court your decision to have allowed her to continue? And that's, that should be in your head at least partway, I think.
Any other thoughts?
Well, even if they don't have an incident, if you don't acknowledge that they aren't prepared to move on, and you let them move on anyway, it's going to be a very long weekend.
Is my solution to the problem creating a bigger problem?
Am I reading my students correctly?
Well, yeah, but Ron's comment does it's like we don't always want to lean on the time issue, but it is an issue when it's an issue.
So, with this particular scenario, when we talk about maybe coaching somebody out so that they can't continue, are there people that rely upon that too much?
Yes.
And why?
No.
Laziness and time.
What do you mean by laziness?
They don't want to have a hard day having to get this person over the hump. They'd rather cancel them out and let them be somebody else's problem.
100%.
Or, it's going to take me too much time to get this student to where I want them to be, so I'm just going to choose the easy way out and send them home.
I'm gonna be the millennial for a moment. I think to that we should add prejudice.
Yes,
Especially
thank
for
you. I
lady
was
riders.
just about to say ego and yes, I was just about to say that. Thank you.
Sometimes, yes.
That could be anything too. I mean, that could be freaking height, ability. Like, do I think this is going to get more and more difficult? Oh, no, I'll cancel them out faster than somebody else. It's just the word prejudice.
Don, I'd appreciate it if you'd explain that a little more deeply.
Well, I think Joe kind of answered it. We need to know when we make these decisions, whether it be in the range or in the classroom, where we exercise flexibility, whether it's the right thing to do or not. And usually, and I think Lynn kind of mentioned this, our experience and how we've dealt with people before, things we've seen before, things we've done before, informs us on what will work and what won't work. But Joe, in the comments of the chat, said people get rid of people because they're not coaching effectively, and it's easier to get rid of them than to struggle through. And I think that may very well be part of the reason why people may counsel out early, because they're not confident enough that their toolbox is full enough to get somebody through, or like Lynn said, lazy.
I think the one that I see the most is the laziness. We have two coaches that I can think of at our dealership that have a much higher counsel out rate than myself and some of the others. And like I've watched them take a class from 8 down to 3 and say, oh, well, none of them had any experience. Like, yeah, they're not supposed to need it.
Yeah, I've actually had, when I was shadowing other coaches, which we do periodically here, direct quote, I get paid on how many students are on the roster, how many students start the class, not how many finish it.
So would good rider coach judgment be the solution here?
It would certainly help.
And what provides good rider coach judgment?
Experience, mentorship, a good smack on the hand.
Knowledge.
Knowledge. How do we gain the knowledge? I'm walking the dog.
Part of it's just raw data knowledge, knowing the curriculum, but it's also the knowledge gained through experience. And buried somewhere in Retsorg is an article about outdoor guides and gaining wisdom through experience, and how they start out not knowing what they don't know, and then they know a little bit, and they and so they're like wary of what they don't know, and they get a little bit more knowledge, and then they think they know everything, and they're maybe more prone to take risks that they shouldn't because they don't know as much as they ought to know. But then as they do it more, they learn, oh, that was a dumb thing. I'm not going to do that again because that person froze, and you do learn from your experience for sure.
Yeah, and you have to want to learn from your experience. It has to be thoughtful experience. We've all seen riders who, oh, I ride 80,000 miles a year. And when you get talking to them, all they're doing is riding the interstate, boring holes in the air from one point to the other. And they're not even thinking about how to do that well, much less ride anything else well. And that kind of, and you've seen coaches like that who all they do is they show up, they read the cards, they don't even give any thought to what did I do and how did it affect the students and the positive rider outcomes. They just collect their paycheck and go home with no thought. They're the people who wouldn't be caught dead coming on this, because heaven forbid they'd find out, learn something or find out something new.
I want to agree with Rita. I have found of some coaches that I have worked with who have been more challenging to work with, they sometimes or often or always, whatever, I'm trying not to be identifying, are experienced coaches. Just because they've been a coach for 22 years doesn't mean they're good at it. Doesn't mean they follow the cards, doesn't mean they follow or read the RiderCoach guide. Just experience, I don't think, is enough.
So I actually have maybe a slightly different take on this. I think that there may be a bit of a bell curve with willingness or unwillingness to counsel people out. When you first start, my experience personally was that I didn't feel, I think it's hard to counsel someone out when you have less experience and you don't have that stronger base of, yeah, this is going a bad direction, it's time. You don't have quite as much of that experience and that judgment built up. Then as you get better, you start to be more confident and more comfortable with counseling people out. And then what some coaches do is they become lazy from there and they become extremely willing to counsel people out. So I actually think that initially there's some resistance to it. Then as experience builds, it gets easier to do. And the trick is not letting it go off the rails.
Because I think that there are certainly coaches out there that are too easy to counsel somebody out in exercise 2. And not to say, to Axe's point, that there are cases where that's perfectly valid, but it shouldn't be used as a cudgel to cut your class down from 12 to 10 and make your day easier.
Yeah, I don't think any good coach is in a hurry to counsel anybody out.
So
They're not
Richard
aiming
gets the
for-
word of the evening by pronouncing cudgel appropriately.
But Axe makes a good point, though, that, sometimes coaches keep students in who are not meeting the objective or not effectively meeting the objective. And, they're in level 2 and they're basically just taking up space because they're not learning anything because they'll only go 6 miles an hour, that as an example.
So I like the thread of this discussion because we're seeing the both sides of things. We do too little sometimes and too much at other times. And that shows you that the balance, he says it's a tough balance, the balance of what we have to do and the kind of judgment as rider coaches we have to have, the balance between being really flexible or sticking with the structure, the balance of weighing SAM, safety, adult learning, and motor skill development when we make these type of decisions. All those things have to be wrapped up into one ball. When we say, I'm going to do this, it has to meet, like Tiffany said, all 7 of those questions, not just, I feel like this is the best way to go. And the only way we can get there is to be knowledgeable about the curriculum and places that we can go and have more tools in our tool bag to make it all worthwhile. That makes
that kind of leads to a point that's on my mind. If I'm the rider coach that has a higher counsel out percentage than anybody I work with, I've got a problem, right? I've
maybe.
either gotten lazy, or I mean, if one coach is consistently higher than anybody else, there's something wrong. So we all want to be the best rider coach we can be. So to me, that should probably send you in search of more tools, or more effectively using the tools you have, or something. My goal is always to counsel nobody out, but there's times where you just have to, and it's the right thing to do.
Or maybe more information, Paul, because maybe you are doing the right thing and everybody else isn't. And so that's, I mean, you have to, we always have to question ourselves. When I do this Rider Coach Life and I bring all these people together and I ask questions and I make a statement of my opinion on something, I have to question, should I really be saying that? And typically,
And will your opinion change next week?
It may very well, because
right?
Who knows what the variables are going to be next week. But you also have to have that. There has to be a certain comfort to say, I'm just going to say what I feel, and understand that you guys will let me know if I'm screwing up. If I say something out of turn, you'll say, I don't necessarily agree with you. And then I have to once again go into self-reflection. Maybe that person is right. Maybe I did say something I shouldn't have. But that's the beauty of it. We've got almost in and out 36 people here tonight with differing opinions, but yet we all seem to agree that you have to have good judgment. Is that something we all agree on here? Good judgment.
If we go
It
back,
always makes me so happy when I see my coaches make good decisions, as the boss and the site, administrator. I really, it gives me a little glow when, something happens and they make a call, and it's based on the good judgment, because you can't teach that exactly. You can kind of lead and give examples, but when it comes down to it, it's really a decision in the moment that is on them, not me. So
I forget who said it, but somebody said talking about music is like dancing about architecture. That was, it's like there's only two kinds of music, good and the other kind, whatever that is. So it's like every decision we make, we're at a vortex, a tornado as coaches on the range. We are at a center of a tornado. Every decision we make has to answer the 7 questions. And contrary to what Don was saying about we have to process all those questions every time, we have to know those questions well enough to actually be able to feel whether or not it's the right decision. So that's my response to that. Yeah, we can feel that out, but we have to know those things well enough to have instinct based on those questions to make the right decision every moment. And our opinions will shift on a dime depending on the learning type. So even in this room, all the opinions that come into play, they might be, I've probably completely contradicted my entire outlook any given a gathering. And that's just coaching.
No, that's the truth. I completely forgot what I was going to say. It was so poignant too. I'm saddened by it.
As far as, and I kind of just typed this in the chat, that as far as being willing to put yourself out there with this group to say what you're thinking and bounce ideas off each other, that's part of us stepping outside our comfort zone in order to grow.
Well, in self-assessment, we stress to our students, self-assess, be aware of your limitations, be aware of your skill level, and be willing to learn. And that's one of the things a lot of us forget as coaches, from my experience dealing with a lot of other coaches. And that's all I'll say about that.
So I remembered what I was going to say, and it comes from a a completely left field. In my observations of my time period as a rider coach, I've watched BRC, what we now call BRC 2013 and before, and then BRC 2014 and after, which was the updated, and now we're kind of moving along to the EP 1x11. What I have seen with those changes of curriculum, and I think this is very important, is that I've seen improvements in rider coach judgment because the curriculum that we're using leads us to better judgment. And as the documents have unfolded and we get certified in the new stuff, what I'm finding is that people are starting to dig into that a little bit more. And so over this period of time, and this is a discussion I've had with Ray on multiple occasions, I used to think there were too many bad rider coaches out there, but now there's not as many of the too many bad rider coaches out there. And we all make our own opinions, so for what my opinion was worth, we all have those rider coaches where we would work with them and we would say, man, I don't know about their judgment, or I don't agree with what they're doing or how they're doing it. But we have to make those judgments about each other and share them so that we can grow. And I think our judgments as a whole community are more better, are aptly better over the last 5 to 10 years than they were before. And this comes purely from observation. So I don't want to necessarily say, well, if you don't show up here, then you're a bad coach. It's not true. There are a lot of really good coaches out there that we don't work with, but we always remember the ones that kind of friction us the wrong way. So I think it's important that, even though we talk about the judgment of others and rider coaches that don't meet our standard, the standard that we see is important, that we don't discount everybody off the cuff.
I know I'm contrarian here, but I honestly remember the great, or who I see as great badass coaches, way more than I remember people. I was like, yep, not coaching with them again. That's just that people are wired different. Some people trail break in the corner.
Why would anybody do that, Robin?
Because they want to.
So I wanted to get back to the structured flexibility thing a little bit here. And this one last question, I think, will probably be enough to get us through the rest of the night. We talked about judgment, but what is our litmus test for deviating from the structure as we do it? We talked a lot about, it just comes to us. It's judgment. The word I was thinking as Robin was talking earlier was flow. We just know it's in the flow. But what litmus test should we use? Take care.
Safety's got to be the number one thing. Is it safe? If it's not safe, it's a deal breaker. It's off the table.
Is it beneficial? I mean, there's got to be a payoff.
Are we working backward by any chance?
Sometimes you got to go backwards.
True.
Hi, can you explain a little more what you mean by working backward?
I can agree with Lynn that sometimes we have to go backward, but are we going backward to the point where it's not helping the student learn what is needed for that exercise? Not necessarily the objective, but just to progress in that exercise to achieve the objective. An example would be, I had a coach that was working with a student in exercise 6. We had the student participate with the group and everyone's doing fine. That student was not progressing, so the other coach decided to work with the student in remedial. And I that was normal. And time went by. I was like, okay, that's 5 minutes. That's 10 minutes. Okay, that's 15. What's taking so long? So I came out and I literally saw the other coach tell the student, don't shift, don't use your brake, just take off first gear and ride exercise 6. And I'm like, that's working backward way too much, because then you're not learning how to shift, retraining yourself to learn how to shift. You're not retraining yourself to analyze how to slow down using the brakes, one or the other or both, how to look or lean, because you're not going fast enough to do anything. So that will be an example of working backward, where it actually hinders the progression of the exercise.
So you're saying they're practicing a previous exercise during that exercise is what's happening, just to get through it.
Well, I'm not sure which exercise would be the previous, where you're just taking off and trying to lean a bike across the range,
Yeah.
That's barely even exercise. That's not even exercise 5, because in part 5, you actually, tell them go fast and slow down. This coach was just telling them, just ease into the curve. Like, I don't care if you're braking or like going fast enough in first gear to go to second. Like, if there's any lean there, or even look, because if you're not going fast enough, you can't do any of the other stuff. So the other coach was working backward to a point where it was hindering the progression of the exercise, so that the students can actually learn to slipper.
Some students may find it too challenging to add a new concept in, and sometimes we need to remove some distractions so we can speed them back up. Hi, I'm sure this is totally different than what you're talking about, but in my mind, exercise 10 comes to mind a lot. Day 2, students may or may not have the shift thing down. Most don't shift during exercise 9, but some do. And it says in the cards, first or second gear. So as much as we want a demo to happen in second gear, I care that they're stopping smoothly. They can choose to make their shift going from line to line. They can incorporate that shift as that next challenge point, kind of to L's exercise 4 question. They get the stop down. Hey, maybe next time you could try that out in second gear. I've heard lots of coaches tell me that coaching on a compact range with that 60-foot width, trying to get exercise 10 done, is impossible to get a shift for their students and for their situation and for their motorcycles. I can tell you that I've made it work for mine just fine, but everybody's situation is different. So it sometimes, to remove a distraction to get to the core, to put that one thing back in, is an attempt to get the student to come along without saying, you're not getting this. I think this is your time to find a new hobby. So there are some opportunities to do that built into the curriculum, and part of our ability to do that OACR thing helps us to make that work and have a positive outcome for those students. And sometimes they won't come along, but that is an opportunity to say, I offered some remedial training to the student before I told them, the basket weaving class starts next weekend.
And I totally agree with you, Jason, because yes, even on a exercise 10, first gear or second gear is optional. But like for the example that was given, my coach was working the student excessively. Like, they just did the exercise, which is like 30 minutes. Now the other coach is doing the remedial for almost another 30 minutes. So that's the student riding an exercise for an hour with no break, trying to do something, and they are not achieving anything that they have been working throughout the day. Exercise 3, 4, or 5 has not been incorporated into the remedial training. So I went out and I spoke to my other coach, and as I was walking out, what I saw kind of comes back to judgment and safety and challenging the student. It kind of comes back to what we were talking about today. My co-coach had a full face helmet on, and I know he's passionate. He's very passionate to help students, but because he had a full face helmet on, dark shades, the students wearing their helmet, he was talking to them in a presentational aspect, in a very aggressive military version of himself. And it was just working everything backward. So I took the coach off and I talked to the student, And the student actually self-elimination as I talked. I was like, okay, so what I'm seeing here is XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And we're working backward. And the student is like, yeah, you know what? Actually, I did not realize that. You know what? Yeah, I'm going to end it today. And I was like, whoa, that's an easy counsel out. I didn't even intended it. But, you know, like being flexible, doing what you need to do. Yes. Being safe, effective, efficient. Yes. But will it be, in lack of a better word, or another coach said it, is your ROI in the negative now?
So you just brought up something real quick. You said you were surprised that they canceled themselves out. Earlier, when we were talking about canceling out, excuse me. Why that wasn't even part of the conversation. Isn't it easier if they make that decision themselves? Isn't that something that we want them to do, really? And so I always say when they go through the requirements of the class, and they say, you for the safety, or you cancel out, those kind of things we talk about canceling out, I'll say to them, it's not going to be a surprise. We will have multiple conversations, and I would much rather you make that decision than me having to make that decision. Many times, and I'll share this very openly, many times my students will cancel themselves out because they know this is not a good time for them. And I always will make sure that I get them signed up for another class. Many of them don't come back for that class. They may be like, no, but I'm going to make sure that because I do not want them to not enjoy motorcycling if they choose to do it. When I got canceled out of my first class, I actually respect my coach very, very much when he said to me, Belinda, if you wreck your motorcycle on this next exercise, you will never ride a motorcycle ever again. And he says, this is an important thing. You have to understand that we cannot let you move forward, because if you wreck, you will never ride a motorcycle again. And I am very thankful for him that he did that to me, and he said that to me, even though I was pissed off at him that he canceled me out. I was very excited. I was very honored. I mean, now that I look back, I'm very happy he did that. So sorry, that's my 2 cents. So yeah, I've got boudin balls. Like I've been rolling boudin balls, so I haven't, interacted a lot. So, but that made me, yeah.
And you're not sharing, which is wrong.
Oh, hey, you mean you guys got to come to Alabama? Yeah, I've got like 40, 50 boudin balls sitting here trying to roll them up. So
The only reason I was surprised is because the student was such a hardworking go-getter and like was so motivated. That was the only reason I was surprised that the student actually just jumped into like, I'm going to self-eliminate. Like, where was all that motivation you had on your own throughout the whole day, kind of thing. That's the only reason I was surprised.
I guess another cutoff point would be is if you're reinventing an exercise, creating a new curriculum rather than using elements of what already exists and they've already been exposed to. We can't get too creative.
Cricket.
It's called a pregnant pause. I don't know why it's pregnant. So I
So
want
we
to
just
go back. Go ahead.
No, you do it. Do something. You want something.
I do. I want to go back to the RiderCoach guide, and does it help us with this decision?
In almost all cases, it offers wonderful guidance, but does not make it black and white. There's a lot of should statements and not so many must statements.
So working on the standards for the motorcycle safety program guidance from SMSA, one thing that we've taken into consideration extensively is should and shall. I guess for my military background, I like will, should, and shall. For some reason, but you know, the reason why we can't say you should do something or you shall do something or you will do something sometimes is it limits your ability to be flexible and do the right thing.
Well, that also fails to recognize that everybody is different, that every class is different, that every student is different. And there has to be that flexibility built in somewhere for you to be able to make those judgment calls.
Absolutely.
You know, anytime that we've counseled somebody out of our class, it hasn't been a surprise, and it shouldn't be a surprise to that student. You know, there have to have been at least some other warnings leading up to that. When you walk over to them that last time, they should know, you know, it shouldn't be a surprise. They should already know it. They go, I knew you were going to say that, you know, and it's pretty rare that somebody argues with you. So, you know, that's should and shall. Yeah, it's the BRC isn't really clear. And I think that's one of those places. I, as a relatively new coach, I've only been doing this for one season. And it's still one of the hardest things that we do. You know, but you do it in concert with your co-coach. I don't teach a whole lot of solo classes, so you know, it's a mutual decision. And again, by the time it's a look across the range, and you give your co-coach that look, and you go, yep, that's it. You know, you walk over and okay, who's going to do it? But it's not a surprise, and you've got your ducks in a row, and you know why, and you explain it, and then you know, okay, come to another class. You know, this is what I saw, and you know, you seem excited about it. Okay. And you try and be positive. At the same time, you're stressing safety and all those other reasons why you're counseling them on, but it shouldn't be a surprise.
A little bit of self-reflection here. I'm realizing that anytime I'm on the range and somebody does get counseled out, it's always me that does it. I think that the coaches, when I'm working with someone else, they don't want to do it. And I guess I've got some self-reflection to do on that one. Because why am I always taking that on instead of letting the other coach do it when maybe they should as well? I think on one hand, I might be a little bit more patient than other people. And they're looking at me like, no, I can't do this anymore. They got to go. And maybe I feel like I have a different delivery than they do or something. But it is interesting when I'm looking back at this, thinking it's usually me. It's usually me that does it. And I'm going to have to dig in on myself for that one a little bit more.
You might have the Midas touch. You can do it with grace and dignity.
I'm curious who your co-coaches are and what demographics they fit into.
Who my co-coaches are by name or?
No, personality-wise, male, female, age group. Because from the years that you've been, you know, part of this group, and a small amount of business experience, I will tell you that most people are not likely to blow up and totally blow a gasket on someone who is small and female and speaks softly.
I had one rider that I literally told my coach, keep eyes on me, because I thought he was going to sock me and knock me out. So, no, being small female has maybe not been as advantageous for that as might be expected. And I don't think that my coaches are mean, crazy, or aggressive. They would be probably mostly males, and they are 20s, 30s, probably. Some of them maybe 50s, but I mean, I am site manager, so I don't know if they just kind of feel like that expectation should be on me to do it. That is a possibility there. But
I think they're abusing you.
Yeah,
Well, I think you should challenge them to start doing it more, as it's a skill they need, and it goes along with everything else.
I absolutely agree with you. I think I'm going to find myself pulling back on that some and letting them run with that. I'd like to observe how they do it as well. That's good.
I
I'm
might
cur-
defer to you because as the site manager, you're maybe in a better position to offer the student their next steps. What options do they have? And to discuss those logistics.
But
I
in
agree.
your role
I
as a mentor to your other coaches, it would be a good idea to let them experience that particular activity.
I agree. And there isn't really much, maybe a little bit more insight that I might have, but they should have just as much knowledge and insight on what happens next as I do.
I'm curious, Bernadette, whether or not you're taking on the responsibility, willingly or otherwise, of counsel outs. How does that translate to end of class unsuccessfuls?
So I think we do cancel out very few. It doesn't happen very often.
But at the same time, if you get to the end of the student evaluation and student X didn't pass the evaluation, are you communicating that message, or are your co-coaches also relying, are they taking ownership of that part of the responsibility, or are they leaving that for you as well?
Maybe I don't understand what part of the responsibility do you mean?
Well, what I'm asking is, you're taking on the ownership, or whether you're taking it on or it's being left for you to counsel out a student early in the day on day one, for example. End of day two, student X didn't pass the evaluation. Who communicates that message to that student? You or a co-coach? Because I see those as two sides of the same coin, whether you're giving them the bad news on day one after exercise 4, or you're giving them bad news at the end of day 2 after all of the evals have been completed.
I think that is probably shared at an end of day 2. That is probably shared. I know that there have been times where myself or the other coach might say, hey, I'll deliver the news to that person. Or, hey, would you deliver that news? So there has been that kind of communication between us. So on a day 2 unsuccessful day for somebody, that's been, I think, shared.
Okay.
We'll typically try to do debriefs ideally with both coaches present.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've experienced it being done both ways. Maybe there's a little bit more physical stuff that has to be done, and one of two coaches takes care of, delivering that message. I was just trying to determine from Bernadette's perspective if all of the bad news delivery was being left for you.
No, that's a great question. And this whole bit of this conversation is, I have so many notes that I've been taking down of thoughts to run through my own mind, as well as with the owner of the site, as well as with maybe a few other coaches too. I definitely think there's some good learning opportunities to come out of this.
So our on the evaluations, our RC1 does all the math, does all the tabulations, and delivers the verbal for pass, fail, and whatnot, but we're always both there together. That way, if there's any discussion after the point, they call the state capitol where our organization is out of and make claims. We were both there. We both had the conversation. Doesn't happen very often, but we're always there together. And I may have seen things through the day the other coach didn't, and vice versa. But it's RC1, coach 1 that which we swap off morning, afternoon, afternoon, morning. So the second day we'll each have one class that we would be informing them of their pass-fail status. Seems to work well. That way nobody gets stuck with it. If we have time, I'd sure like to hear what Bernadette's wallpaper is all about.
I'm actually up here twice. So one is my video, one's audio. Is it the one me and two people?
Yeah.
That is I do Run for the Wall every year. And that was a delivering the flags. So that picture is taken in front of the Lincoln Memorial.
So what are you holding?
I am holding one of the flags that I
Oh, I'm
carried
sorry.
with
Okay,
us.
so what's in the middle? Person in the middle, what are they holding?
That is me in the middle. And I'm also holding a flag. It's just in a different kind of case. It's not exposed.
Okay, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Sweet.
I wonder, is there anybody else here that feels like you're always doing the council outs? Is there anybody that's kind of in my same boat?
I would.
I don't
would
really have a
say-
choice because I'm always doing single classes.
It's you or
And if
nobody.
that's Bernadette, if that's the case, then you're certainly aware of it. So why don't you just share the wealth and not be so open to step up? I mean, share the experience.
2024, gonna share more.
There you go.
There's a lot to be said for the fact that you're the site manager, because you do have the ability to potentially offer more counsel on options to the students. I put in the comments that man who raised their hand and says he has to do all the counsel outs because he holds the pocketbook and has the ability to offer more options than I do as an employee and rider coach.
And why is that?
Why does he have more options? Because it's his pocketbook.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah, and I can see your point, Rita. If that person, that site manager, that company owner is on site that day, but I've dealt with that both with the site managers on site as well as the company owner on site. And yeah, it's not my pocketbook. I can at least outline to some degree what some of the options are, but whether that person's on site or not, the options don't necessarily change. And one of the things that we would frequently do in my experience back in New Jersey was write up notes for every student that was either counseled out or did not successfully complete the student evaluations, and write up, even if it was just a couple of sentences, nothing extensive, but at least somebody back in the office would receive that information Monday or Tuesday after a class and be able to anticipate that they might get a call from a disgruntled student or a student who's been advised, call the office on Monday or Tuesday, and they may be able to offer you discrete options that I can't necessarily do more than discuss as possible.
See, that's where I lose connection, because in our program, all those options are company policy and all the coaches know that. And so there is no one person gets to say yes, one person gets to say no. It's all company policy and everybody's aware of it.
Well, there's two issues here. One, if you're counseling somebody out because they're not meeting the objectives, they're becoming a danger to themselves as others, what does that have to do with the employer's pocketbook from a standpoint of, liability if the person gets hurt because you let them continue in the course?
In Rita's case, I can speak with a little bit of authority as she's pointing at me. Twofold at the college. Number one is that if you are counseled out of class, the only way to come back to a class is because you're going to pay for it again. In my own business, it's very much the same way. However, at the end of class, because we were talking about the giving students the bad news that they don't pass based on scores and, more importantly, student attitude. When I'm around, I may give them the opportunity to come back on another day to simply do a retest at no cost to them, but I'll only do it for me because I won't give away Rita's labor, but I will give mine away all day long to help customers be happy. In our college situation, I can't do that. I cannot bring students back for a retest, and sure the heck isn't going to be for free because of a billion reasons of bureaucracy and other shit like that. So every business does run different. Richard's got a great point that, you know, and others, that there are some, I know some business owners that, hey, if you get counseled out at exercise 3, you're going to get a partial refund, and here's how much it is. And that's great because it's their decision. So everybody's going to choose to handle it in a different manner. And in Carol Ann, I know that most of what you do is Illinois, and when you don't pay for it coming in, does anybody care about getting a refund anyhow?
Well, there is no program in Illinois unless you go to Southern Illinois University down in what is that, Carbondale. No, I've been working for the Riding Academy for the last year and a half or so, and you know, it's basically if they're counseled out, they would have to repay unless the manager for the for the program for where I teach lets them in again. Okay, but my question was, and I get it why you're saying what you're saying, but that really to me has nothing to do with the safety of the students or the rest of the students if we're counseling somebody out for those reasons. If we're counseling out because we're lazy, that's a different story. But usually when we counsel people out, I know for me, it's not a surprise. I've been talking to them the whole time and asking them how they're doing and all that. And especially students that fail the eval at the end of the course. They're generally not surprised because they know deep down inside that they didn't do the things that they needed to do. Now, if it was a point or two, okay, I could see them being upset. But usually the ones that are weak, you know, they've got a bunch of extra points that they need, that they get over and above 1 or 2 point fail. So, but to me, they don't equate as far as a student needs to be counseled out because they're safe, unsafe, or they're a danger to herself from others. You know, talk to me later about the monetary aspect of it, but you know, my goal is try not to counsel them out. But of course, if it needs to be, it needs to be, because I'm not going to take that liability of letting them continue and get into a problem where they've really hurt themselves or others.
In my situation, I understand what you're saying, Carol Ann, that if they need to be counseled out, they need to be counseled out. And I'm not going to not counsel them out just because Jason's not there. It's just a matter of whether I'm counseling them out or whether if Jason happens to be observing what's going on. And usually if he's hanging out, he's pretty observant. He'll know what's going on everywhere on his total site. And he and I have probably had a conversation about, hey, I've told him already, I'm kind of watching this student. I'm doing what I can with them. And there may be a counsel out situation. So even he's not surprised, as well as the student's not surprised. And if he happens to have to go somewhere else and leaves the site and that student needs to be counseled out, I'm still counseling him out. If he's there, then if possible, I have him talk with the student because ultimately he's their customer, but they're not going to stay. And I'm not going to risk his pocketbook. I'm not going to risk the student's outcome.
Right. Well, you have a unique situation there. So.
Well, I mean,
I think
as
that's
I'm
common.
not always at my site, but I would much rather deal with a student that's been counseled out than one that's hurt because they should have been counseled out and weren't. You know, and if my coaches take somebody out, I know they got a reason, you know, and I will do what I need to, you know, to make it good for the student. You know, and I generally offer people an opportunity to come back, you know, for cheap, but and many of them do not, you know, very few actually follow through on that. So it's not like I'm losing tons of money by giving them a get back in option, because most people, when they sit and think about it, choose not to. So
I think
So
it
I,
varies a lot business to business. I mean,
Yeah.
Riding Academy here, right? It's a different story. So first off, we don't have them repay full dollar. The problem for us is whether we have a schedule slot to get them back in again. So there's that. But if they've bought a bike or something like that, most of the time they're not going to pay to come back. We're just going to keep working with them until we have a result that works, that's satisfactory.
Well, to answer Dave, I'm going to say no. There should be no structured flexibility because that has to do with curriculum. What has to do with administrative standards is way above our pay grade.
It depends upon the site structure, the program structure. Is it under a state? Is it independent? Oh my gosh, the headaches that you can get into there. Take care, Paul. Let's bring it back and wrap it up, because there's a couple points that I'd still like to make about structured flexibility. And if you look in the RiderCoach guide, page 35, maybe 36 in the newer one, it gives you the 7 questions that should be considered when we make those kind of decisions. But I think there's one part else that we could probably add to this, and it's the 4 rider subtasks. When we make these judgments, should we look at how the rider subtasks play into the structured flexibility?
Don't they in some ways play into everything we do?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Well, then I'm not going to answer.
Damn it, Ron. Because when we look at structured flexibility, it tells us to look at C, safe, effective, efficient. It tells us to look at the underpinnings, safety and risk management, adult accelerated learning, motor skill development. But should we also look at, how the rider subtasks affect that? Is it, social, emotional, cognitive, physical?
we probably
I
all
can't
had to
resist.
counsel somebody out, not because
see-
of the emotional aspect, right?
Well,
They're
but
too
see,
overwrought to continue.
we're stuck on counseling out. Structured
I agree.
flexibility,
Yeah.
Isn't just counseling somebody out. It could be modifying what you're doing for the students, that student's benefit.
Look at it. Does your student have a cognitive problem? Is your student having an emotional problem? Is your student not getting along with you? And what's the other one? Can they do the task?
Physical.
What switch do you have to address?
A
And
disability.
Ron, when you're getting into the physical stuff, that can play into even stuff like weather. If it's raging hot out and everyone has is dehydrated and is getting sunburned and has a headache and so on, that's what structured flexibility is for.
Many years ago, I was teaching with a guy, and we had done a repair to the range that was in one of the swerve areas, and then it rained, and it hadn't really set up great. And I went over there before the swerving exercise, and it felt a little slick to me. And this was in BRC 2013. So we had 2 swerve, going on, and after the swerve, they would do a offset weave to get back online. And I said to the coach, I'm not comfortable using that swerve area over there because I think it's a little too slick with the rain. I think we have to only use one side. So we did a split, before splits were kind of a thing. And we kind of managed it just like you manage exercise 5 part 2. we had a little conversation about it first. How are we going to do this? Because, we can't have all 12 out there at once, and, we were only going to use one side, but we kind of had half the group off on the side with one coach, having the commentary, and, the split happening, and we felt comfortable with that because we really didn't change the exercise. We just kind of broke it up into chunks. But, that kind of guided our decision.
I think that's a fine example of structured flexibility.
I'm trying to remember other examples I've heard from the QA process where people like do crazy stuff with exercises that, they're kind of not recognizable, and you made everybody go, wow. So, none of them are coming right to mind now.
I mean, I can throw one of those out. First class of the season last year. I finish up Friday night class and I walk outside to an inch of snow on the ground. And we don't have a way to get a plow guy in. And so we ran pretty much all of the internal classroom stuff, seeing if the range would melt. It didn't melt. And we ended up pushing the class down the road. But we've got the option to, deal with a thunderstorm, deal with some conditions or something or other through structured flexibility.
So I think that's a good place to end. I can tell we need to have a tribe talk just on counseling out. And since Mark did that at an IRETS, I'll let him do it. He must have stepped away. I'm getting a lot of feedback about the 6 p.m. being a better start time, so may have to continue with that.
Although, then we've got the West Coasters. I think Bernadette, you came in kind of later, probably because of the earlier start time for you.
Well, she's at work too.
Yeah, and I think from here on out, I'm working even later, so I don't know if I'll be around for a while, but I mean, I'll certainly always give it a shot. But I mean, I don't think there's many of us West Coasters.
I
Or
see.
there's ones like me, Rita. There's ones like me that just don't read the email correctly and then go, still pop in at the regular time and be like, "What the hell is he talking about? Ending now?" And
yeah, try
realizing, yeah,
or the email that had 2 different times, because every time I correct it, it goes back to the old time.
So that was probably it. Look, I actually read some of it this time.
Try living in Eastern time and working in Central time.
It's always a nut roll.
Rita, I do the same. I was also riding home, so there was that. That's why I was a little late. Took the new BMW out.
So one of my reflections this week, as I'm always reading and listening to stuff, was actually a rush to, and one of the phrases in the song was, "I can't stop thinking big," and so I started to get really in depth with myself about that. Is what does that really mean? Where can you go with a mind that can't stop thinking big? And so, in a parting shot, I think the people that show up to this group and participate and jump in, they have that kind of mindset where they don't want to just rest on their laurels. They want to continue to think bigger than we are as individuals, bigger than we are as a community, bigger, maybe badder parts of the larger motorcycle community, helping other people, being self-reflective, continually learning and being better. So that's my thank you, or a bit of gratitude for the week, that I have such great people around me that allows me to continue to think bigger than I actually am and set goals outside of my reach that I can always strive for to be like each and every one of you. So thank you. I love you. Don't take it the wrong way. Belinda, and we'll see you next time around. Quite abundant.
Happy New Year, everybody. Take care.
Happy New Year.
Bye, y'all. Happy New Year.
Thank you for participating in this episode of Rider Coach Life, brought to you by RiderChoices. If you are a Rider Coach, you can catch other episodes by logging into www.riderchoices.com, or you can also find links at Rider Coach Life or Rider Coach Trainer Life Facebook groups. Please remember the Motorcycle Safety Foundation's 5 core questions and always survive the ride. Take care.